The peerless Professor Richard Wolff joins us after too long an absence. Professor Wolff, very glad to see you back again. I had intended to ask you overwhelmingly about economic matters, and I will with your permission, but I can't resist asking you what you were thinking when you saw frankly, the ravings of your new president in the Oval Office with the Mephistophelian gnome Netanyahu sitting grinning next to him. It was a scene for the ages, Professor.
Well, I'd be glad to tell you my reactions, and I'm glad to be back speaking with you, George. I admire your work, and it's an honor to be a small part of it.
Thank you.
The Palestinian people have shown the world over the last year and a half that despite an unspeakable onslaught of military destruction, maiming, killing, that has led much of the world to use the word genocide over and over again to describe it, the Palestinian people have shown they're not about to leave what they take to be their land, despite the suffering they've obviously gone through. Why Mr. Trump would imagine that they're becoming a piece of American territory would change that behavior is a mystery to me, and to be honest, I suspect is a mystery to Mr. Trump as well. What we can expect is that the Palestinian people will not agree to go whatever this eventuates into. The United States will then be faced with the same dilemma the Israelis did. Are you going to try to bomb them out? Will that then be the promise that Mr. Trump made in the campaign to, quote unquote, end all these pointless, endless wars? He's already bombed Somalia within the first weeks of his administration. This will be another long, drawn-out war, causing the United States to be looked on in the Arab and Muslim world even more than it already is, as equivalent to and complicit with Israel. This is very strange, except in one dimension. Everything Mr. Trump has ever done has been to disrupt the normal way that governments work, that politics here in the United States works, that the Republican Party works. It's all disrupt and be different. Stay in the limelight, stay on the evening news, come up with something so different, so bizarre, so extreme, so much the things that polite people don't say, that you garner the attention. That is what is going on here. Neither he nor anyone else knows what portion, if any, of what he talks about will ever see the light of day or last.
Well, let's hope this is one of those crackpot ideas like some he had in his first term that never goes any further, although the consequences of it are already reverberating across the Arab and Muslim world and across America's allies, satrapies, you might call them, in Europe. Perhaps we'll come back to them in a minute. But the poll question we are asking this evening, will Trump's tariffs work or backfire? Will they, Professor, work or backfire?
They will backfire because they are both internally contradictory and will, and already are, provoking enormous disagreement, hostility, and backlash. Mr. Trump won the election by 1.5% of the popular vote. One of the reasons he has to talk about a mandate all the time is because he doesn't have one, and the election didn't give him one. He cannot afford to lose 1 or 2 or 3% of the vote, because if he does, he loses, and the support for him vanishes. He has now been attacked by half a dozen major business associations, the Wall Street Journal particularly attacking his tariff program as unwanted, dangerous, and so forth and so on. Whatever else helped him win, one of the key factors everyone agrees is that there was anger in the population over the inflation that the country suffered in 2021, 2022, and 2023. It set the stage for his claim that he could magically stop the inflation, just as he could magically end the war in Gaza or in Ukraine or anywhere else. You know, the grandiose gesture and all of that. But here's the reality. One of the few things that tariff imposition usually does is raise the prices inside the country that chooses to impose tariffs on the imports that it draws from elsewhere. The United States is a more globally engaged, import-dependent economy now than it has ever been in its entire history since it stopped being a colony of Great Britain. Okay, so we depend on all kinds of things, and above all, from Canada, from Mexico, and from China, who together are the three major trading partners of the United States. By the way, not Europe. So it's very important to understand that if he were to impose across-the-board tariffs, even if he were just to continue with the tariffs on Mexico and Canada, and please note how quickly those had to be undone with an effort to control the damage of even proposing them that it caused him. Please do not be fooled by the notion that anything here has to do with limiting fentanyl flowing drugs into the country or some other. These are excuses made to suggest that a policy error of gigantic proportions had to be quickly undone. And here he is pretending there was something he gained. Mexican troops have always tried to stop the drug trade in Mexico. They have a 75-year history of failing to do that. And we don't need a border with Canada, obviously, because no drugs of any importance come through there. This is silly. This is the desperate effort of the Public Relations Department not to admit that the whole tariff idea, and you can see it from the first administration he had, people should understand most economic policy that the president undertakes, he has to get the approval of Congress. He has to get a lot of work has to be done if he's going to have any chance of getting it through, with one exception. Some years ago, the Congress, at a time when we were not interested in or discussing tariffs, gave the president extraordinary authority on his own to apply tariffs. When Mr. Trump became president, he discovered that he can't do very much. Most presidents discover that. But that he has one tool. And even though it may not help him, it can put him in the middle of the story because he has the authority. He can do it. He can explain it to the people, and nobody else can do it. He can do it all by himself. He doesn't need approval. So he attacked China, and he will just on and on and on. This is theater. It's political theater. Look how active I am. Look how powerful I am. When he made a mistake in the first year in his first administration, he kept saying, I'm going to hit the Chinese with a tariff. I'm going to make the Chinese pay a bigger tariff. He had to have it explained to him, and it took a year, that a tariff is paid by the importing country to its own government, and the victims of the tariff, number one, against China is not China, it's the United States. An undergraduate with 2 weeks of economics education in an international trade course knows that. The literature on tariffs is huge because they have been used by one country or another for at least 300 or 400 years. But he didn't understand even the most basic idea, or if he did, then he slid over into having to embellish his theatrics by pretending that the tariff will hit the other country. Here's the irony. No matter what happens, Mr. Trump has given the world a lesson. Do not rely on trade with the United States. It can be taken from you. It can be abused at the drop of a hat, or to be more precise, at the drop of a wrinkle in American domestic politics, which can lead to such a person functioning in such a way, being in such a powerful position. And any CEO with a brain is going to try to diversify away from dependence on the United States, to reduce relying on an export market here or providing imports to the United States. It's too risky. And the risk factor, which all economics involves, has just become much, much worse. And if the rest of the United States allows him to continue, it will get very, very bad for the United States. This is short-term, political gain-driven theater at an immense long-term cost to the United States.
It's a perfect segue into the BRICS currency issue. I'd like to take your expertise, Professor, if I may. He threatened 100% tariffs, tariffs, tariffs. It used to be Russia, Russia, Russia. Now it's tariffs, tariffs, tariffs. He threatened anybody who seeks to, as it were, give the dollar a wide berth. He threatened them with condign punishment in the form of tariffs. Now, on one level, you know, if the Sopranos came along and threatened me in that way, I might, for an hour or two, contemplate my options. But my underlying determination would be to get out from under these Sopranos, because these people will always come back for more. That's the likely feeling throughout the BRICS now, isn't it?
Absolutely. Let me give you an example. One of the leading countries, one of the founders of the BRICS, is Brazil. And Brazil is a leader and has a dynamic leader now who is an advocate for the BRICS and so on, Mr. Lula. And Brazil is also the source of a lot of the coffee that Americans wake up each day and drink. Imagine 100% tariff on coffee. That would mean that the drink most Americans start with every day, which is coffee with some sugar put in it. Both coffee and sugar are imports. The United States does not produce a significant quantity of either. A little bit of coffee in Hawaii, a little bit of sugar in Louisiana, and so on. But the latte, as we call that here in the United States, that people in America begin with, would double in price overnight. You want to see Mr. Trump ridden out of town, metaphorically, on a rail? Then do that. That would be the most dramatic transformation of his support into opposition that I could imagine. Now, let me give you another example to drive it home. We have a product in the world, an important product, the electric automobile, the electric car, and the electric truck that is produced in China by the BYD Corporation. B is in boy, Y is in yellow, D is in dog. They have come out of the competition of the last 15 years where every car company is trying to make the transition from fossil fuel to electricity as its source of energy. The best job, the competitive winner, is the BYD Corporation. By the way, not the Tesla Corporation, the BYD. The current tariff in the United States imposed on electric vehicles from China is 100%. It's been that way now for half a year. Mr. Trump put 25% on in his first term, and Mr. Biden raised it to 100%. And that's what it is right now. That means that if you buy an electric vehicle, which is the best quality at the lowest price from China, you will get the best quality, but you'll pay double the price. You'll pay the price the Chinese charge, let's say $10,000, but you have to give an equivalent to Uncle Sam, 100%, another $10,000. So for an American, this optimum truck or car electric will cost, here we go, double what the competitors of America, those companies in Asia, Africa, Latin America, or for that matter, Europe, they don't have to do that. It's a competitive disadvantage for every American company relative to its foreign competitors. That's going to hurt those companies. Many of them are going to shrink or disappear. Jobs in America producing are going to disappear because the Americans get. This is ridiculous. This is shooting yourself in the economic foot for a temporary vote gain, you hope, from looking like you're a big tough guy. The Chinese simply turn to the rest of the world and market their car quite successfully. They are now one of the biggest automobile. For us, George, we are watching a theater of agitational politics with no concept of what's going on, doing its theatric best to hold the public attention. And that, I have to admit, at least after 3 weeks, they are still doing.
What do we call this, Professor? You and I are socialists. Other people are capitalists. What do we call this kind of economics being practiced by Trump and indeed by Biden before him?
Well, to be honest with you, and I know that's what you want from me, the United States is a declining empire, something you and the people you most reach in your country, you are the experts. You are the ones before us who had to live through the decline of the British Empire. All right, you are at what I assume is the end of that process, or nearly. We are much earlier in that process. Our peak is literally in this century. So it's, 20 years old, if that. So it hasn't sunk in yet. Our political leaders, and let me give you an example. In the election between Mr. Trump and Kamala Harris, neither one of them ever could come near to saying what I just said. We are living through the end of an empire. A rational society would sit down and say, okay, that's what's happening. It shouldn't really surprise us since it's happened to every other empire of which there is a record. So let's sit down and let's be different. Let's face what that means. Let's see what lies ahead of us, and let's engage the rest of the world in some way to make the decline of this empire less traumatic than it might become, given that we have nuclear weapons and given the way the world looks. I would also add my own opinion that American capitalism, partly because the empire is shrinking, is also facing more and more difficulties. For example, an uninterrupted 40 years of redistributing wealth from the bottom and the middle to a tiny group of people at the top, two of whom are billionaires who run this government, Mr. Trump and Mr. Musk. Okay, this is a sign itself. So that my answer to your question is, we're a little bit out of control because we are using theatrics and gestures, and they are desperate because they can't admit or face what the problem is, a declining system in a declining empire, which is a heavy load and a heavy burden, but they can't admit it. We treat that whole issue in this country as denial. Our politicians act as if we were the United States of 1970 or 1980, or maybe even the 1990s, a unipolar world where we can imagine ourselves without an enemy, without a threat, without a child. All of that's gone. But yet they can't face it. Look, as better than most, they decided that they could defeat Russia in Ukraine, that between their money and their weapons, they could do it. When they learned already within weeks that the Russian military was what they should have known it was, but didn't. And so they realized, since they can't use nuclear weapons, since then it's over, that they could only use economics. So they said, great, we'll hit them, if you pardon my borrowing from you, with the mother of all sanctions. And they went to work and they did that. Total failure. Total failure. Why? Because they didn't understand the BRICS. They didn't understand the change in the world. They didn't know Russia could sell its oil and gas to India and China, and the whole logic of what they did would be undone. They didn't know. They can't admit it now. I'm a product of the elite schools in this country. I know some of these people. I went to school with them. And, it's a different thing. They sit in a room. They think that Mr. Trump shaking his fists will make the world fall into line. It is tragic. There's even a pathos connected. The whole world is being held hostage to the theater of desperados busy denying what is falling apart all around them. For me, that's the best way to understand what's happening.